abstain? Thank you.
And then I'll move to appoint George McPherson, 419 Boston Post Road, East Lyme, as an alternate member of the Zoning Commission with a term to expire on December 6th, 2021.
Second.
I don't know how many years this would make for George serving our town, but it's meant many, 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 because he spent a whole long time on planning, now in zoning. I thank him for his service.
Yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain?
I also to point something out, 3 times I've had to hit record. Appears that and then it shuts off, so there probably is going to be some problem with recording this meeting because it keeps cutting out.
Well,
But we talked
It's
about
riveting.
this. Yeah.
why watch Netflix? We added a resolution that was forwarded from the Southeastern Connecticut Council of Governments. Let me try to explain what this is. The Council of Governments is going for a grant. They're going for a what's it called? RIPIP grant, which is the Regional Performance Incentive Program. And they've asked for money. They're confident they're going to get it for 3 different positions within the COG that member towns will then be able to go to the COG and use those services. And because these are grant-paid positions, it'll be free to the towns in the first year or 2. So the grant runs out and we decide, well, we do need a grant writer regionally, and we then would maybe budget money and pay for the grant writer or for the building inspector or regional code enforcement official or the human resources, there she is again, the human resources staff consultant. And so they're looking to add 3 people onto the staff up there, all paid for by a grant, and then we'll see if it works out. And if so, then we'll start budgeting up there and expecting area towns to pay per diem per event for these services should we need it. This is an effort to regionalize, to do shared services. These are 3 identified positions that were identified in a big shared services study that the COG did, saying, what can the towns do together? More and more and more. Well, here's 3. When we did a survey, we found out all the towns are talking about grant writers, but nobody has one. But there's one town that does, and it's New London, because they're a big city and they have a lot of grants. So what I'm asking you to do is to pass this resolution, which will enable us to partake in the grants services should they become available, should those grants become available. The way the state has set this thing up is each of the 22 towns, should they wish to perhaps someday, maybe, use one of these services, even for an hour, we would need to have a resolution on the books. So that's what this is.
Resolved that the town of East Lyme hereby endorses and authorizes the Southeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, SCOG, to make application to the Connecticut Office of Policy and Management, OPM, for Regional Performance Incentive Program funding for 3 projects. A regional code enforcement official, $100,000, a regional grant writer, $80,000, and a regional human resources staff consultant, $80,000. All of which could benefit the municipalities of the SCOG region. And be it further resolved that the town of East Lyme authorizes the council's executive director, James S. Butler, to make these applications and to execute and deliver the agreement on behalf of the Southeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, and to do all things necessary and appropriate to carry out the terms of the agreement, including executing and delivering all agreements and documents contemplated by the agreement.
Second.
Motion been seconded. Other comments or questions?
Mark, could you explain what the regional code enforcement officer is? This building code?
Building inspector. Building inspector.
It's building.
And there's a lot of the more small podunk towns that only borrow a building inspector here and there. Like Sprague actually used our former building inspector part-time hours up there, and some other towns are the same. And then they might have one surge in projects and might need the resources of a building inspector. Building inspectors are hard to come by these days. So having one on hand when you have a big project come in is going to be handy.
Okay, thank you.
Now,
Yes, ma'am.
so let's take the regional grant writer for an example.
Yep.
If we got the grant for $80,000, or meaning the council got the grant for
Yep, yep,
$80,000,
yep.
we would then write a separate application to try to get part of that money.
No, what it would be is, what's going to happen is, let's say all of this is funded. The Southeastern Connecticut Council of Governments will be hiring 3 employees. So they will be employees of the COG, and participating towns may contract for their services. So they're going to just be sitting there waiting for the phone to ring, hoping a town needs a grant writer, let's say.
So then we have to pay for that person to come.
Not in the
and-
first year or two, because
Right.
the grant is going to pay for these people. So there'll be no cost to the town in the first year. We'll be encouraged to use these people, and by golly, I'll get my foot in the door very quickly, being the chair. So yes, so in going out, if this is successful in year 3 or 4, when they're paying for these people out of their budget, yes, we would be expected to pay for services
As used,
as used.
not a percentage, whether we use it or
Not
not.
1/22% of these people, right, as used, if we feel the need. If we don't need another building inspector services, we would need that. Yeah, it'd be as used, and that needs to be worked out within the Council of Governments. How we would do that, what would prioritize, what town gets to go first, or is it a lottery? Yeah. Because there might be all 22 towns or 21 of them dumping in, going, yeah, we need a grant writer.
So how will that work with the grant writer if 22 towns tomorrow?
Yeah. The
Say,
COG's,
hey.
the COG's going to have to work out those parameters. We're just putting in for the grant now. If we were to be approved, we're going to have to come up with a priority, a way to triage that, a way to limit. Listen, if a town comes in and this is this massive, some of these grants takes a person 6 months of full-time work.
I know.
That wouldn't be appropriate, right? So there has to be a limitation as well. So time limitation, and then who gets to go first.
What about
Triage.
conflicts of interest? For example, grant application for a steep grant, and we're applying, Waterford's applying, London's applying. So for the
Good
same
point.
money,
Yeah, I'll bring that back to the COG.
Okay.
So right, if it's competing grants.
which is probably going to be more common than not.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. There's a lot of grants out there for historical homes, as we know, and for fishing dock leases, and maybe
Yeah,
dredging.
please research that one. Yeah.
Maybe dredging of the Niantic River. Those are the kind of things that are on my plate right now that I'm trying to tackle. So that might not be compete. Well, there's other towns with historic homes that we'd be competing against, but
Anyway,
yeah.
so something
We'll
to
have
consider.
Thank you.
There'll
Yeah,
have
I'll
to
bring
be
that
some-
back to the COG.
Okay.
All good questions and comments. Anything else?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Mark, the application forecast, I don't know if it's potential savings to the towns. I don't know, is it for 1 year's worth or 2 years' worth?
I believe it's 1 year's worth.
It's over $1 million savings for an $80,000 investment, which would be one of the best investments anyone could make.
Right.
But it really depends if you actually use that service.
Right.
Now, if we just increased the hours of our HR representative, we may never use the HR service that's
Probably
available.
not.
We have a full-time
Right.
building inspector, we may never not use that.
But we're a dynamic and passion-filled town. We have a lot of interest, so maybe the grant writer would be overused.
And if the resource is there,
Right.
then
Right.
we have the opportunity to use it,
Opportunity.
and it's pay-as-you-go after the original grant runs out, whether it covers a
Right.
full year and a half, two.
Right.
It's a resource that you pay as you go, so to me, from that standpoint, if we, in the absence of a fire marshal or a building inspector for a while, it's something, as a contingency plan that we could potentially use
Sure.
to fill a void by some
Right.
day-to-day need.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Especially during those transition times.
That's true.
And they offer that service now. If they're a planning agency primarily, and that's how they got started. And if we were to lose our planning person, planning director, for whatever reason, they could step in and run our planning department until or zoning until we got a permanent replacement. Those are the kind of services they offer currently.
If I may.
Yes.
So there is no cost
No cost.
to us supporting this at this point?
No, it's just a resolution of acknowledgement, if you will, and the support.
So what do we have to lose?
Zero. Absolutely zero.
And we might gain?
And gain, hopefully, if the COG wins, we will win. It's a stronger COG.
Yep.
Any others? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Ex officio reports. Who wants to start us off tonight?
I have, with the holidays and so forth since our last meeting, I have had none. I have a couple this week, but later on in the week, for tomorrow night, but that's it.
Okay.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I guess I'll go. This is my third night of meetings.
Okay, we yield
So-
our time to you.
Yeah, all right. So library on Monday. Some good news. They've the carpets, as you know, in last year's budget, we approved removal and replacement of carpets. They got a little caught up in our new purchasing policy, but I think that's been straightened out. They also found that there is a state bid on carpets already out there, so they're using the state bid criteria of the purchasing plan.
Perfect.
So they will be squares instead of the roll-out carpet, which is good. If there's problems, they can clean them up. So they had someone come out. They're waiting for the quote. So we should know that. They should know that soon. Hopefully, we can get started soon. They approved their budget. You'll be happy to know their budget is only requesting a 0.92% increase from last year. So I think some of the money that they recouped they pulled money back from Sundays because of the insurance problem, and I think they saved some money there, so I think they're applying that. I think the budget's going up more than 0.92, but they're applying it, so a very responsible budget coming from them. Planning, and as everyone knows, they're back open Sundays. So.
Right.
There was also some talks, kind of interesting, that they house all the Historical Society items in there, which is of interest. And there was
In the East Lyme room.
in the East Lyme room, and they were talking about formalizing an agreement with them of there's no real official agreement of who could see it, stuff like that. So they want to formalize an agreement either through lawyer or whatever, just to make sure it's understood, the caretaker and who could use it. Anyways.
That's a good point.
Planning met yesterday. They had a referral from zoning, and this was on an architectural design district text amendment, which is essentially taking the architectural design guidelines that were approved back when I was chairman, like 10 years ago, making that a more of a requirement part of the site plan. That would apply to CB commercial, which is downtown. So that would be an overlay zone. They found it consistent with the POCD, with some comments on there that there needs to be consideration to private residences, especially for minor altercations that maybe they shouldn't have to go through, have an architectural review on painting the house or adding shrubs. Those were their comments. They also received from about Memorial Park Drive, changing the entrance for Memorial Park Drive onto how it intersects with Oswegatchie and
Oswegatchie Hills.
and 161.
Yep.
So they will be forwarding a report to us, finding it consistent with the POCD.
Terrific.
So that's coming. The only other comment, they're obviously marching on the POCD. They're wrapping up their online survey, so if you haven't done it, do it, because it's probably going to be wrapped up this week. Do I have the date?
Don't they have a meeting next Wednesday?
They have a meeting next Wednesday. Where are my notes? Here it is. Their POCD meeting is next Wednesday, the 15th. And the 29th, they're going to have their first open forum of POCD. So there is going to be open for people to come to address the subcommittee on any and all topics related to the town in the future and how it relates to the POCD.
What day, do you know what day of the week that is? The 29th?
I thought it was a Wednesday.
Wednesday or Thursday.
So that they might be able to use this big room instead of, because they have a
That's their
meeting
plan.
Yeah, because they have a meeting over in the small room, and I know a lot of people are interested in attending.
It's a Wednesday. and I
There's
think
nothing
I think they already
on-
reserved
There's
this.
nothing
room.
on the fourth Wednesday of the month.
Right. So that'll be here.
The 29th?
So I would encourage. I only gave them comments that if they're inviting like people from the zoning commission, if they're going to have a majority, they may want to have a agenda or something.
Mhm.
Right. We may have the same problem if we all decide to go, which isn't a bad idea. So we may want to consider that. The only other thing is they never really, they went and reached out to all the different commissions in town, especially land use commissions and stuff like that for feedback for their POCD. And it occurred to me as we were meeting today for the docs that if there's any feedback the Board of Selectmen ourselves are interested in giving back, we may want to consider that. And the docs are one of them. And our subcommittee will meet and we'll bring it to you, the whole commission, and if everyone's okay with it, we'll pass it on.
Sure.
The funny thing is, if it gets incorporated, it'll come back to us for approval
Right.
in August. So if there's any other topics that anyone feels of interest, I would encourage us to discuss that. And that's all I have. Building meets in a couple weeks. So.
Terrific. Mr. Cunningham?
Yes, last night I attended the Historic Properties Commission, and they also were working on the POCD response to the questionnaire, and they came up with a pretty succinct document that I think addresses their concerns, which I believe they're going to be editing and submitting. The other thing that they've been working on is, maybe if you've driven around in other towns and you see these little plaques on the side of a house to circa, 1620 or whatever year, or later, certainly. Probably not too many 1620.
Well, Plymouth there are.
Yeah. So they've come up with a design, and with the help of Signcraft, and John Wilson attended the meeting last night, and they've come up with an oval sign with a nice type font and a representation of the scallop shell, but not the same one that we use in our logo. They wanted something different, and also something that could be in the the overlay process that they use for making signs that can be pulled off without leaving parts of the scallop shell behind. But so they've come up with a nice design, and I think eventually they're going to be presenting that for sale to folks in town that would be of interest to put that on their home, and will also serve as a little fundraiser for the Historical Properties Commission. They've got a thin budget, and maybe that'll help them to be able to do some of the things they need to do, and it'll be an item that people would like to display on their home. So they've been working on that, and I think it's a nice idea. And that's it.
I don't know if they can keep the revenue they collect as a commission.
Yeah, we'll have to find out how that gets.
But they could do it through the Friends groups.
That might be a way to do it.
They are set up to be fundraisers and collecting of money and spending at will, because they'll be collecting it independently. It's not from the taxpayer, not through government.
Because it would have to go into the general.
So, yeah, otherwise,
Right.
as ex officio, if you would pass that along, and I'll see Barbara along the way, I'm sure, but let's not let them do all this work and then find out that the money's going to the Board of Ed.
Well, yeah, but at any rate, it's a nice idea, and it'll be a nicer
Right.
idea if it can benefit the historic properties in some way.
Right, right.
Good point.
Mr. Daigle, you've been busy.
With only one of them,
Busy.
ex officios. I've only met with one since our last meeting, and that's the Public Safety Building Vision Committee. We met last night. We received 85% complete construction drawings for the renovation of the building. There were a couple minor modifications to the layout, the armory and the room where maintenance and service, repairs, cleaning of the arms would be done, was put into a separate room in the armory for the purpose of storing the chemicals and so on and so forth. The armory is still located in a place where the police chief wants it, so as the officers come out of their briefing room, they pick up their weapons and go off to their vehicles. Very good place. There's, like we said, we're 85% complete. We're probably going to need another 2 to 4 weeks to complete. The architect has some things to do on their own, but one of the probably longest item to complete is the interface of the requirements from the town's IT vendor, communications vendor, and closed-circuit TV. A lot of that information has been exchanged with the architect. There's a little bit more to go through. So, we're probably 3 to 4 weeks away of having a set of plans that we can go out and solicit a bid to. In parallel of that, the town needs to work on what I call the front matter to the bid, the administrative requirements of the bid, insurance requirements for the awarded bidder, and so on. The architectural firm will give us the technical content of the bid. We need to put the front matter together, so we go out with the bid process. So good progress there. We're a little bit behind. We thought we'd have our construction drawings a full set, 100% completed and given to us by the end of the year. So we're going to be a couple weeks off, but I don't see any impediments to get us to where we need to go. Couple very good positive notes. The architect prepared, and the town building inspector endorsed a modification request to the state building official to not require structural upgrades due to the change in use of the category of the building. And the state building inspector's office agreed that even though we're changing the use of the building, that there was no technical need to do the structural reinforcement that the current building code requires for the type of use for the building. That's going to save us approximately $240,000 to $250,000 that won't be needed to be executed based on the state's authorization and interpretation of the need for that upgrade. So that was very good. Additionally, I guess it's Julie works for which department?
Emergency management and fire
and
marshal's
fire
office
marshal.
is duly had it.
Julie Wilson prepared and submitted a grant to the state of Connecticut, which will be forwarded to the, which was endorsed by the state of Connecticut, will be forwarded to FEMA in the amount of $175,000. And if that is approved by FEMA, and we don't know the exact timetable, the intent of that grant would be to pay for the emergency generator, whole building emergency generator, to support, the functionality of that building during day-to-day operations or during emergencies if there's a loss of commercial power. So once that would, again, if approved by FEMA, will reduce the investment in the building by $175,000. So two very positive items moving forward. So all in all, I think we're in very good shape. We've got to pull the request for a proposal in. Oh, one other thing, we did have a discussion about the need to hire an independent construction manager. For our school building project, we had a general contractor and a construction manager. At the time, we don't feel we need one based on the scope of the project. I do have an action to go talk with the building committee to understand their availability and maybe town staff to interact or be available to interact with the general contractor to resolve any questions that come up. Run questions from the general contractor back through the design agent to facilitate any concerns that may come up during the execution of the work. So, but we did agree that we potentially could either add a construction manager later in the process if needed, or potentially just a owner's representative who would be the focal point to support. But once construction starts, the building committee will have the responsibility, as it always has, as the main representative for the town to support the execution of the project. So all in all, we're in very good condition. Just a couple weeks, if you will, a few weeks behind where we thought we might be when we had our first preliminary timetable. And we'll work hard to get the bid together, get it out, find the costs, and then be in a position to have the vision committee come back with a recommendation on what we do and what we think it's going to cost.
More good news last night. We talked about confirmation that we're not going to need sprinklers in the building.
Right.
And we kind of knew that. We firmly believe that, just like the earthquake proofing. We firmly believe that we had a reason to not build those costs, and we got a confirmation on that. And we also went out for a grant for all this equipment. I think we're going to keep the microphones because they're in good working order, but to change the audio visual, because that, of course, reports to the current dispatch and then gets broadcast. That all needs to get shifted to the new building. Big expense in that, and it has to go digital at this point. So it's an $85,000 grant that we think we'll qualify for, that's been submitted by our IT department, who is Carmen Ames, and her able-bodied volunteer, Mike Mines, who is just a wonderful resource to this town and gives a lot of time and does a lot of the work on the webpage and posting of these videos. And Mike put together that grant. So we're hopeful that's more money that wouldn't be in our communications budget, that we'll be able to continue these live feeds for our town meetings, which is very important.
Paul, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Would you, building commission meetings are usually, I believe, the third Thursday of every month at Lily B. Haynes. Would you like me to ask them to put an agenda item on there
Well,
for public safety?
Before you do that, let me make sure I can attend.
Sure. I'll get you the date.
Yeah, I'll reach out to the chairman prior to that to have a question about what we think their availability would be to, my understanding is the chairperson was at the schools almost every day during that project over the course of 2 years.
Sure.
Very-
As long as they can provide that service, then we don't think we're gonna
We're gonna be
need
close.
to have an additional cost of someone to be able to function in that capacity, so.
Spoke to the town engineers about this and overseeing, and they're like, we move dirt. We move dirt and pave roads. We don't build buildings. We're not those kind of engineers. So they really think it would be above their expertise level. They don't know if a contractor said, yeah, we did this today, we put this kind of gauge wiring in and all that. They wouldn't be able to verify that. They don't feel very confident that they'll be serving the public. So building committee should be able to handle it, as we know they will. But if not, we might want to build that cost in. Okay.
Oh, I'm wondering, who made the decision that a sprinkling system wasn't required?
It was originally thought not to be required by the town building official. Originally, the design agent thought it was, and as they looked into their code requirements, it's not required based on the number of cells that we're putting in the building. The building's not currently sprinkled right now. What they thought was driving the need for the sprinkler was the detention cells, because you have someone, they're sleeping overnight.
Right.
But the code does not require it based on the number of cells that are gonna be in the building itself. which
In
is
multiple
right now.
egresses from that
Multiple
point.
egress from the building.
That's the key, is 2 ways out.
Right now, the
That's
plan is
nice.
only for 3 holding cells if we decide to go with that option. One for an adult, a male, one for a female, and one for, a juvenile.
Has our new fire marshal been consulted on that?
Probably not, day 3, probably not, but we'll bring them up to speed. It's more of a building
Code.
Code report.
code, and the building code is very clear, and we pointed it out. Ledger just built their building without sprinklers, and of course our chief comes from Ledger, and he was primary in building it, so he was confident that once we got everybody on the same page, singing from the same hymnal, that we'd be clear on the code, so we are. But you're right. We'll bring the building. The new fire marshal needs to be brought into all this, and will be.
I think the idea that you've got people that are going to be there perhaps for more than one night, possibly, or,
Probably hardly ever. Maybe on a 3-day weekend they might spend 2 of them.
but we also have people working there 24 hours a day. And it's more